venerable monks, nuns, and today we have Samdhong Rinpoche also here, sisters and brothers in Dharma. My humble greetings and good wishes to you all, and through you to all sentient beings. Of course, I feel greatly honored, and it's my fortune to be in a Lerabling, meet in person the Ripasanga, Sujay Rinpoche, and also my very intimate friends here, and to discuss the foundation of Buddhist philosophy, but at the same time, I'm a bit scared. In an emotional moment, as mentioned by Patrick, in Delhi hotel, over a cup of coffee, we agreed to have this course. At that moment of time, I thought end of August 2012, lot of time. And I will able to prepare some course, reading material, references, and many things as an academician thought about. But the time rolls down, and the 25th August of 2012 comes today. And in the meanwhile, I was kept busy in various things, so I could not prepare anything as I thought of that time. So recently, the thought come to my mind, why did I accept this course? Anyhow, in Tibetan, there is a proverb saying that the words which flew out of the mouth, then there's no handle to bring back. So my promise to Sujay Rinpoche has been there, so that's why I'm here. Therefore, in the beginning, I would like to make few clarifications. Some of them already made by Sujay Rinpoche, and then my apology for few things. Then we shall try to go into the subject. The first clarification is that many people think this is a Dharma teaching. Of course, you all practitioners. So this morning when we entered here, you just make prostration and all these things. This is not a Dharma teaching. It is a kind of semi-academic talk. The word teaching is used in the classroom also. Teacher, teaching, all these are used, but it does not mean it is a dissemination of a dharma. So therefore, this is not going to make us dharma teacher or the dharma student, so we all equal. You just feel like in a classroom in a university, so you can argue, you can disagree, you can just not accept what I have said. All these are very much possible. And you can make a very critic kind of question. The basic thing is we try to get somewhere through a logical inquiry. Then you might say it is just an academic. There is a little bit, as I have said, semi-academic, because if we become purely academic, then I shall have to use academic jargon and a lot of footnotes and references and then weigh the things discussed when we pretend to be having no faith but just discussing. That's not here. I remember 20, 30 years before, one of my friend, a Buddhist scholar, was to be appointed as a professor in one of the American universities for Buddhist teaching. And he did not select it just on the ground that he is a Buddhist by faith. So therefore he cannot be an impartial teacher. He cannot do justice in the academic world. So I still remember that. So that kind of academic is not there. So therefore I say it's a semi-academic, not religious teaching. Then also in the academic world, we look every subject in a comparative way. Comparative study of religion or comparative study of this and that. But philosophy and religion cannot be studied with comparison. Comparison is only workable in the ordinary modern worldly things. When we enter into philosophical world or spiritual world, then things shall have to be see as it is, not comparing with anything else, because each things are unique. They do not exist in comparison. They do exist as its own characteristic. So we compare with other, then we may lose the objective way of looking at it, and our view might be prejudiced through the process of comparison. Comparison usually leads to either similarity or dissimilarity. All the phenomena which exist in this world need not be similarity or dissimilarity. There can be beyond similarity and dissimilarity. So this basic thing we have to be kept in mind. So, being a semi-academic discussion, as I mentioned before, you may agree, you may not agree, you can argue, you can criticize, and we try to inquire into the things jointly. So we all on an equal level. So this is about the nature of the 5-day gathering here. So we will go like that. And there's no need prostration or prayers in the beginning or at the end. So just as a secular discussion. Having said that, I have to confess and apologize to Samdhong Rinpoche and you all 3 things. The first thing is our agreement about the subject or the topic which we are going to discuss in these days. The essence of Buddhist philosophy. This is a very vast and huge subject. And I apologize for accepting this title without much thinking, and now I feel it is on my part quite arrogance to say, yes, we talk on the essence of the Buddhist philosophy. It's really arrogance. I think the Buddhist philosophy is one of the most subtle, deep, diverse, and vast, which can be inferred saying the volume or the quantity of literature. In this world, I don't think any philosophical or religious tradition which have such enormous corpus of writings and literature dealing with the philosophical, religion, and even the scientific part of the subjects. So, only in the Tibetan language, if you look the Kanjur and Tanjur, there are more than 300 volumes and thousands of titles and hundreds of thousands of pages. One person cannot even read them in a lifetime if you go slowly. So that means it is very, very vast subject and very difficult subject. The top scholars such as Nagarjuna, Asanga, Vasubandhu, Chandrakirti, Dharmakirti, and so forth, most of them usually on disagreement. You will find very few agreement, largely disagreement. It means that the Buddhist philosophy can be commented or explained or interpreted in many different ways, yet you can reach to the truth on the diverse viewpoint and diverse path. So a person like me, who have no in-depth study, no practice, or no insight, has agreed to talk about the essence of Buddhist philosophy, need to be apologized. And secondly, the subject and the time schedule is also not very compatible. Such vast subject we are going to talk within 5 days is also very assumptuous, and therefore we shall have a lot of difficulties. And the second thing I need to apologize is my language skill I might be able to deal with the philosophical subjects in Tibetan language, since it's my own mother tongue, but in any other language, particularly in English language, to deal with the Buddhist philosophy is very difficult for me, because I never systematically learned English language. 54 years before, when I arrived in India as political refugee, it was 1959, after settled down in the refugee camp in Missamari, that is in Assam, near Tejpur, Government of India, the organizers of the refugee camp, has arranged teachers taught us English, Hindi, or other languages in order to survive in India. So I was the ringleader to resist it. I opposed to learn any language. Of course, I do not have much followers, but I did resist it. And my resistance went on for quite some time. When I live in Kalimpong, the latter part of the 1959, there was a very famous British monk, Most Venerable Sangarachitji, and he tried to teach us English. He gave us tea and he gave us cakes, and then he tried to teach us English language. I enjoyed the tea and cake, but I resisted the English teaching. I funnily argued with him. He speaks little Tibetan also. Argued with him. Why I can't say I is, you is? Why should be there different ways, you are or I am, or so many words? Why I can't say I is feeling good? So he used to say, no, when language is a language, we cannot argue in that way. And thereafter in Darjeeling, a British nun also tried to teach me, but all the time I resist. And finally, it was 64 or 65, then I have to shoulder more responsibilities, and there I have to use foreign languages, and everything going through a interpreter was not convenient, particularly when I need to argue with the Indian officials. And argument through interpreter was very frustrating. What I used to say, they are hesitant to interpret. So then I begin to pick up the language. So picking up language means there's no no real knowledge. I make a lot of mistake in grammatical components, and sometimes I feel inadequate in vocabulary as well. So you have to bear with me when my vocabulary and my pronunciation make you difficult to understand. I need to apologize for that as well. And the third thing is any person who gives a course should have prepared well in advance, and some reading material and some references should be prepared to distribute among the audience. I was not able to do that also. So these three apologies, I will try to communicate with you whatever comes to my mind, with little bit of framework of this title, and then we shall try to learn, study, inquire together, jointly, helping with each other. Since this is a very large number of audience, it is difficult for me to entertain question sessions every section. So if you have any question in the course of discussion, you may note it down, and on the third day and then last day, 2 sessions, we will spend more time on question, answer, and interaction. Otherwise, there will be no questioning. But it does not mean in your mind you should not question. As a good listener, you need to be a good questioner. You need to ask, you need to argue in your mind, not accept anything so easily. This is Buddha's way of listening, even the dharmic teaching, not speak of academic. Buddha explicitly said that, O bhikkhus and wise people, don't accept anything because of your respect to the teacher, the Buddha. Like a goldsmith examines the gold very thoroughly, the gold put into the fire, cut into by sharp instruments, and rubbing into a black stone, and thereafter he decides whether this is pure or 24 karat gold, or there's some mixture. Similarly, when you listen to me, you must be alert, awake, and sharp. The part of my teaching which are directly perceivable, they should be examined whether there's any contradiction in perception, and the portion of the subject which are to be comprehended by inference mind or the deeper inference mind, you need to deal with then all the three ways of examining. And only you feel convinced through reasoning and logic, only then you accept, otherwise you should not accept. So similarly, Acharya Ayadeva, the chief disciple of Nagarjuna, have also said the quality of a listener need three things: unbiased mind, with a sharp intellect, and having a deep inquisitiveness. If your mind is not unbiased or free from prejudice for or against, or already drawn conclusions in your mind, then you cannot listen any further. So therefore, you need a very neutral and unbiased mind. And with full of doubt, not a hurry to reach a conclusion, but deeply searching and deeply reasoning. The reasoning is the basic thing in Buddhism that you all know. Nagarjuna have said that the faith and the reasoning both are important, but without reasoning, the faith may lead you in a completely wrong way. Therefore, the faith must be supported and supplemented by reasoning. So, with very alert, unbiased mind, you can join with me in the learning process of the Buddhist philosophy. In the beginning, I thought if my words are not clear to you, then you may ask questions immediately. But since considering the large number of audience, this may not be feasible, practically not feasible. So you can help yourself with each other. Now coming to the subject, I am quite lost how to begin, how to advance, and how to conclude. However, we will have to try. since we are all here, we cannot escape, so we shall have to do something. The three words being used, title of this course, Essence, Buddhist and Philosophy. How we can differentiate the essence and the peripheral things. The entirety of the philosophy in Buddhism or the Buddhist philosophy contains a lot of essence. So here we shall have to understand the word essence, not the deepest meaning of the philosophy, but the short form. Here I will use the essence as a packaged one. Condensed. The vast essence need to be condensed into few words so that within few days we can talk about. Then coming to the Buddhist, we have to understand that the philosophy which comes out of Buddha's teaching, and that philosophy not necessarily of a Buddhist concept. There can be secular concept as well, but which comes out of Buddha's teaching or Buddhist canon. So here we have to refer the word Buddhist in that way. And philosophy is more complicated one. In India there was a philosophy conference, and I was asked to give a keynote address. Then I jokingly said to them that philosophy means to make complicated a simple thing. That is philosophy. A simple thing which is communicated in a simple way, that's not philosophy. A simple thing which is communicated with a lot of big words and jargon, and that becomes philosophy. The Sanskrit word is darshana, and Tibetan word is tawa. Either the tawa or darshana, these are very synonym word, but this tawa and darshan is not very synonym with the philosophy. Philosophy is a Western expression, and I don't know from where its origin, but it refers not only to the viewpoint. Darshan means to see. Tawa means also to see, to view. And there are two parts of it, the subject and the object or the mind. The mind is also the tawa, and the mind which sees something. The object of seeing is also, we can refer tawa or the darshana refers to not the seer, but the mind who sees it, or the object what sees it, both of them referred by darshana. And that kind of darshana, that kind of seeing is not very similar with the meaning of philosophy. Philosophy is more complicated. But here we use the philosophy, the word of philosophy, for the Buddhist terminology of darshana, or the seeing, the view. Yanta Vetawa Samek Drisht is being translated in English language mostly the right view. And the right view means the right philosophy. Then we shall have to say here, if philosophy is understood in that way, so the view which sees the reality, the fact, clearly or as it is, that is the portion of philosophy in Buddhism. Very generally or very roughly speaking. His Holiness the 14th Dalai Lama used to tell the people that there is three different things in Buddhism: Buddhist science, Buddhist philosophy, and Buddhist Dharma. And Buddhist science and Buddhist philosophy can be studied by all without depending whether the person is a Buddhist or not. Everybody can derive benefit by studying these two subjects. But Buddhist Dharma is only for Buddhist practitioners. So this division, this categorization make a very clear demarcation what is science, what is the philosophy, and what is the Dharma. So when he talk about the science, that is the part of the Buddhist metaphysics which deals the outer phenomena, the worldly things. How does the categories or the components of phenomenon exist up to the subtlest atoms or atoms. The form and the other components of form. To analyze these things are belonging to the part of science, it may call. And then it deals with the viewpoint which related to the basic reality, a viewpoint which sees the reality and which leads to your own entire mindset the defaultments and the cessation of defaultments all are depend on a mindset. And that mindset is come out of your viewpoint, your view of the what you understand, the real or the fact. So that is the part of philosophy. Philosophy and science both deals with the foundational things which has nothing to do the development of mind, but which is only analytical understanding of the outer worldly or foundational phenomena. After analyzing the phenomenon, the entire existence, then which will give you a viewpoint. That viewpoint leads you to an mindset or aptitude, and which directly connected with the deterioration or development of your mindset, your mind, your entire mind. And that is the portion of Dharma. I use the word Dharma, that is more precise. If we use the word the religion, then again there is a lot of rooms for different interpretations. The word Dhamma is also not very compact one. Depend on the accompany words. It can mean number of different things, but here we are using the Dharma as a path of liberation. For that we use the word Dharma. In this world, there are countless and numerous different traditions of philosophy, different traditions of Dharma. Many of them disappeared, many of them exist, people do practice, and in future many new things might come up, because the sentient beings are by nature inquisitive and want to know the reality, and more than the knowing the reality, each sentient being has a naturally inbuilt will or wish to eradicate the suffering and to achieve happiness, pleasure, peace, and finally a kind of permanent peace and tranquility. And no one wishes to remain in suffering, in pain. This is not artificial. This kind of attitude is natural. Any living creature, any sentient being, by nature don't want displeasure or pain, want pleasure and happiness. So this natural approach of the mind of the all sentient being, which lead to a rise of all the dharmic traditions, philosophical traditions, and the majority of the knowledge which we have today come out of this urge how to get away from pain and misery, how to achieve happiness and tranquility, peaceful. This also demonstrated by the historical Buddha. When I say historical Buddha, means the Shakyamuni Buddha, who appeared in India 2,500 years ago, lived as a person who gave the teaching, and from which tradition the Buddhism is today. So that Buddha has also, in the viewpoint of the religious believers and in the viewpoint of the historian, they are two different. Then I say historical Buddha means the Buddha born and brought up as an ordinary person and in search of knowledge, insight and wisdom, 6 years meditated and finally attained the Buddhahood. So this is, I am referring historical Buddha as known to common people. The historical Buddha also had the urge to search the path for liberation from the misery was caused by encountering to the human misery, the misery of decay, the misery of disease, and the misery of death. When he encountered these happenings, then Prince Siddhartha realized that the worldly pleasure has no meaning, and one must search for a permanent solution to this pain and misery, which is pervasive to every unenlightened persons, and I must do something to search the remedy to put an end to all these miseries. So of course this is naturally each individual, each living creature has the basic right to find the solution to his or her problem, to find a remedy to the pain and misery. So the Buddhism, the Buddha himself, the historical Buddha himself, get the initiative to searching the remedy to misery was the realization of the misery, the pain, and thereafter in search of that, then he get enlightened. And after enlightenment, for 40 years he visited almost every part of India and gave enormous teaching. But the entire his teaching were was the enlargement of his first teaching, the first Dhammacakra Parvatan, the first sermon after his enlightenment, which gave to his first 5 disciples. And that teaching is commonly accepted by all different yanas and nikayas of Buddhist followers. So we will make this Dhammacakra Parvatan Sutta, the Buddha's teaching of the first sermon at Sarnath, shall use as a basic text on which we try to find the essence of Buddhist philosophy. So it gives a kind of a reference point directly to the Buddha's own words, and how from this reference point the different philosophical schools were emerged and developed. So it may have an easy approach, not to scatter our inquiry or learning process, just to go through a basic framework of Buddha's teaching. After enlightenment at Bodh Gaya, historically known that Buddha remained silent for 7 weeks, and then thereafter he come to Sarnath, meet his old 5 friends, and then he gave this first sermon, which deals with the Four Noble Truths. And the cause is not a natural thing, not given by someone else, not created by someone outside power, but this cause is of your own creation. Therefore, the antidote to this cause you can create. You have the ability, you have the strength, or you have the potential to do that. And if you do that, you will definitely achieve the cessation of the misery. So all this sequence is only the singular question, how to get rid of the suffering and how to get a permanent cessation of all kind of misery. So this is a basic framework the Buddha gave. And then it is also largely agreed by every Buddhist philosophical school that the root cause of suffering, there are 2 facts or 2 truths of the origin of suffering, the Dukh Samudaya Satya, and that is, one part is the karmic force, and the other part is the, again, cause of karmic force, the mental defaultments, the kleshas. And the kleshas are come out of ignorance, avidya. the avidya, the first component of the 12 links of Patidhasamanipadya. And to eradicate avidya is the only way to reverse the entire process of dwelling Patidhasamanipan, interdependent origination, that is commonly known or commonly accepted by everyone. But the difference comes, what is avidya? What is the ignorance? So from this inquiry, from this discussion, the four different schools of philosophical traditions arised and developed. The Vaibhashikas, Chidamava, the Sutantikas, Dodipa, the Chittimatrata or Vijnanabad, the Sinsamba, and the Madhyamikas, the Umapa. So all these four, their disagreement and their differences are in the identification of what is the first link of the first portion or first link of the 12 link Patisampadya, the avidya, the marikpa, the ignorance. So this is how, dealing with the Four Noble Truth, then gradually the four philosophical schools are being developed. This is commonly known to all the Buddhist tradition, no matter which vehicle, which yana it belongs to, no matter which philosophical school it belongs to, everybody accepts the historical fact that Buddha's first teaching at Sarnath was a teaching of Four Noble Truth. And that Four Noble Truth he taught by repeating 3 times with different aspects of instruction. So this sutra is available today, and it is quite astonished. In Tibetan Kanjur, the 90% of the Buddha's teachings were translated from Sanskrit origin, and only 2, the first Dhammacakka Parvatan Sutra, which now compiled in the Kanjur canon, is from Pali. And Pali Dhammacakka Parvatan Sutta, one longer one and one shorter one, basically no difference, but the explanatory or narrative part is one is longer and one shorter, which were translated from Pali as early as perhaps in the 9th century or early 10th century in Tibet. So at that time also the Tibetan Losavas and scholars do have access to a Pali canon. Then apart from that, we have Mool Sarvasvadin's Dhammacakka Parvatan Sutra in Sanskrit, that was also translated into a Tibetan language. And then there is Mahasanghika's Dhammacakkappavattana Sutra, which is mixed with the Prakritic language, little bit of Sanskrit and little bit of Prakriti, that is also available, which was not translated earlier, but now translated at Sarnath, and it is published. So there are 4 different kind of Dhammacakkappavattana Sutra. The teaching of Four Noble Truths is recorded in a Buddhist canon, in Pali, in Sanskrit, and in Prakriti. Because in Prakriti, Buddha's teachings are very rare. Now, very few are available. Most of them disappeared. So, anyone looks to these sutras, then you will find the first sermon at Sarnath, how Buddha did deal with the disciples and with the subject, and that is very clear and very unique. The entire Buddhist philosophy, science, and dharma are put a basic framework upon which the different nikayas and different schools all can be later on developed. Apart from that, the Dhammacakkappavattana Sutra is partially available in Vinaya Pitaka, Moola Sarvasvadin Vinaya Pitaka, which is translated in Tibetan language. In that also, the short form of the Dhammacakkappavattana was translated, a part of that canon, and also it is available in Lalit Bistar, Jachirubendo, that is a kind of Buddha's biographer, and in that also the words are translated. And Abhi Nishkarma Sutra, number Jumendo, in that portion, in that also the Dhammacakkappavattana Sutra is in short form contained there. So it is very vastly and largely popular among the Buddhists. So in Tibetan language, in 3 Indian languages, and many other Buddhist countries' language, which is available. So therefore, we shall make this sutra as a reference point, and from there we shall try to proceed our discussion. So as I mentioned before, the Four Noble Truth is very famous to Buddhist world, and you all already familiar to it. So I need not repeat it again and over again, but if I refer briefly, the first noble truth is the truth of dukkha, the suffering, and the second is the dukkha samudaya, the cause or the origination of the suffering, and then the third is the cessation, the nirodha satya, how to come to end of the suffering, and the fourth is the satya of marg, the path, the reality of the path. This four makes the entire framework of Buddha Dharma, Buddhist philosophy, or Buddhist metaphysics. Everything is come out of explaining these Four Noble Truths. And why for these Four Truths have been called as Noble Truths? Arya Satya. Noble is, the expression noble is in Sanskrit and Pali both in Arya. Arya really means elevated one, who is not on the lowest ground, but who is elevated somewhat. Elevated means who have seen the reality by perception, who realize the reality. And the four different schools, the Vibhashikas and the Stantikas, explanation of Arya Truth, Arya Noble, the Arya Satya, and the Madhyamikas and the Vijnanava's explanation of Arya Satya, they are little different. The first two schools explain why it is called Arya Satya, because these truths are being perceived by elevated persons or enlightened persons. Unenlightened person, ordinary people, do not see the truth as it is. And particularly when Buddha gave the teaching of Four Noble Truth, the first reading he says, this is the truth of suffering, this is the truth of the cause of suffering, this is the truth of cessation of suffering, and this is the truth of path to cessation of suffering. The first round is just introductory, saying this, this, this. Then second time he repeats again, then he says, the suffering truth need to be known. The truth of cause of suffering need to be eradicated. The truth of cessation of suffering need to be achieved. And this truth of the path of suffering, path of the cessation of suffering need to be practiced. This is the second time. You should know, you should eradicate, you should achieve, and you should practice. So this is combined with the action, what to do. The truth of suffering is clear to everyone who are experiencing suffering. There's no question of not knowing the suffering. Then why he say you should understand, you should know the suffering, the truth of suffering? Because there are so many different kind of suffering, and the majority of the suffering we do not understand as suffering, as a pain. We think this is pleasure. So all the worldly pleasures are within the category of suffering of change. Dukkha, Parinam dukkha, or Sanskar dukkha. There are three different kind of dukkha, which he later on explained. That means the pain, misery of changing, misery of pervasiveness of the misery. So these three categories. So the misery of change is very difficult to understand. So that's why the Maitrana says that the ordinary people who have not attained the elevated path, who have not attained the realization of the truth, those people, in Sanskrit word is prithak jnana. Prithak jnana means who have not attained the path of Aryahood or the direct perception of the truth. Those persons who have not direct perception of truth are like your palm of the hand. It is quite hard and rough. In the palm of the hand, you may put here, or you may put any small particle. You do not feel. You do not feel any uncomfort. And that very small particle, or the here, if you put in your eye, you immediately feel discomfort and pain. The Aryans are like eye, who sees the entire suffering as a pain or as suffering. The ordinary person, like a palm of hand, could not feel that subtle or that changing pain. So we shall discuss the 8 different kind of suffering which Buddha have counted in the Dhammacakkappavattana Sutra, which we are referring to, and then 3 kind of suffering which is not directly counted in the Dhammacakkappavattana Sutta, but the subsequent sutras have sum up these sufferings in different Buddha's teachings. That is very common to all the Buddhist literature. This is the counting of the number of sufferings is, you may all know, but it is little important, because later on when we go to the different philosophical schools, their perception and their way of looking at it are depend on how we understand the reality of suffering. The suffering of birth, suffering of old age, suffering of disease, and the suffering of death. This 4 is very commonly referred in Buddhist canon. Historical Buddha have saw a diseased person, a dead body, a sick person, the suffering of disease and the suffering of decay and suffering of death. These 3 he saw, and then he questioned his driver, the chariot driver. This suffering comes to certain particular individuals, or it comes to everyone. This question was very relevant and very important question. Of course, Siddhartha was a very special person, even historically, very inquisitive and very intelligent. And this question is really deals with the truth of suffering. Truth of suffering, basically of its pervasiveness. The response to his question by his church devil was that, yes, Prince, whosoever has taken birth in this human form, sooner or later, everybody shall have to decay, and everybody may suffer from disease, and everybody is bound to die. The death is all pervasive, which spares no one. And then he realized that his all worldly pleasure and affluence has no meaning. It's absolutely impermanent, transitory, and the suffering is a real, serious suffering, and we have to undergo through this suffering again and over again. Siddhartha did not witness any birth, but birth is after death. The consciousness not come to an end. The consciousness, the stream of consciousness, the continuum of consciousness will remain there. And therefore, it will take another form of life, another body, reborn, and again go over and over this matter of suffering. And this for suffering is very obvious, experiential to everyone. Everybody goes through this suffering. Then the fifth is the suffering of association with disliked ones, which we experience almost every day. And the fifth is separation from the liked ones, loved ones, and the next is suffering of not getting what one desires, what one wishes, and the last is suffering of difficult to security, to guard what one possesses. So these 8 different kind of suffering, which all bondage people, unenlightened people experience day in and day out, life after life, all the beginningless births and endless births we shall have to face with this kind of suffering. Buddha categorized these 8 different categories of suffer, of pain or displeasure, trying to show the next step, the cause of suffering, the origin of suffering, and also at the same time the pervasiveness of suffering, which is related to the dependency or lack of independency of our relation with the five aggregates with which we do exist. I don't know, it's clear or not. The desire, and desire associates with fear. The fear and the desire, or the fear and the attachment, which is always resulting into unhappiness and pain. And that pain is being experienced on the ground of our dependency on the aggregates of the being. So that he wanted to point out. And that's why in the sutra, after counting these 8 different kind of pain as a detailed explanation, then he sums up, Dorna, to sum up all the 5 aggregates of our being is misery. Dorna, Pombunga Dungel Chiranshinos, the 5 skandhas or the 5 aggregates of our individuality is the vessel, is the base on which all the suffering is continued and also experienced. So this is a very subtle philosophical reference of the misery, which is differently understood by many different schools. To differentiate from this kind of understanding, the Buddha is referring to those kind of suffering which is easy to understand how it relates to the desire, Trishna, and the attachment. So this he counted. Why the 5 aggregates are the basis of all suffering and itself is suffering? Because the association of our consciousness, the stream of consciousness with these aggregates are a kind of bondage. That is the real bondage. We cannot dissociate. Our consciousness cannot dissociate without achieving the cessation of suffering or the nirvana. We can, by our will or our wish, cannot dissociate with these aggregates, with this form. The 5 aggregates on which our being or our existence is based is the vessel or the source or the on which the suffering is being experienced. That need to be understood. Disease, decay, death, and rebirth all these suffering are all because of our mental attachment and the bondage by which the stream of consciousness is unfreed with the five forms of aggregate. That is the real pervasive nature of suffering need to be seen, need to be known, need to be understood. So he trying to refer to that. And apart from this 8 and lastly all the 5 aggregates is the nature of suffering, then in the different sutras he sums up all these sufferings are into 3 categories: the misery of pain, the misery of changing, and the misery of pervasiveness of pain. Dukkha, sanskar dukkha, parinam dukkha. In the dukkha, the pain of pain or the misery of pain is commonly understood. All the pains and miseries which we at this moment understand as pain. And the second changing misery is all the worldly known as pleasures, the health, the wealth, the fame, the food, all kind of worldly pleasures. There are limitations. If it is real pleasure, then it should remain or it should increase as much we enjoy them or we use them. But all the worldly pleasures are very temporary. And after some time, after a short period of time, we will see it is not pleasure but it is pain. For example, we suffer from heat and go into an air-conditioned room and immediately feel relief, and that is considered to be pleasure. And we remain there for unceasingly, and we begin to feel cold and need some warmth, because the cold is not a pleasure, it is a changing a pain to another pain. And if you remain there, then you will feel it unbearable. Your hunger, take food, feel pleasure, but you go on eating, then you will get sick. And it goes to the pain. So this is changing pain, the parinam dukkha, which result is pain. And the third is the dependency on force of karma and force of matter defaultments. The death we have no control over. The disease we have no control over. Since we have body, we have to die. Since we have body, we have to face the old age, the decay. Since we have the body, we have to experience the pain of disease. So all these are due to dependency on the bondage of the karmic force, the force of action, and that force of action is caused by certain mental defaultment. So therefore, you are entirely having no freedom, no choice. So that is the pervasive nature of the pain, the suffering. Unless you see the pervasive nature of the suffering, realizing only suffering of suffering is not enough to have a real desire or real will to get rid of the cause of suffering and to practice the path. For the practice of path, you must have a real sense of longing for cessation of the misery. That is called Nisarana, the Nginjung. In our truth of path, there are three basic path components: Nginjung, Chansen, Yanta, Betawa, the Nisarana Chit, the Buddha Chit, and the right view. And the Nisarana Chit only comes when you see the pervasive nature of pain as pain. So that's why the Buddha have said the pain should know, the pain should understand, the pain should be realized as a pain. Only the misery of misery is understood as pain, that understood even by animals, but that is not enough to have a indomitable will to practice the path in order to achieve the cessation of the misery. So this three different category is the more important portion of the reality or the truth of suffering, the Dukh Arya Satya, which shall have to be understood in this way. And if you see this in a right perspective, the nature of the suffering, then it will be automatically to inquire the next stage, what would be the cause of suffering, what would be the origin of suffering. And through that inquiry, through that inquisitiveness, we can understand the second noble truth, the origin of the suffering, the truth of suffering, from where it origins. So it does not come without any cause, it does not come something external power or external factor, it is all accumulated by ourselves. That explains by its own sequentially. So this we shall have to look at it. So then Buddha says, the cause of suffering, the second Arya Satya, when you realize all the pervasiveness of the suffering and which need to be eradicated, you have a desire to come out of this suffering, then you shall have to eradicate its cause. There is no symptom treatment. Unless the cause is eradicated, there is not going to be cessation of the misery. Because when causes are accumulated, the causes are ready, then there is no way to stop giving result from that cause. So this is the sequential of these two noble truths, how to be perceived, how to seen. Now the cause, which give us the component of our form, the five aggregates of our being, these are direct result of a powerful karmic force, and that karmic force, the force of action, is being caused by a defaultment of mind, impure mind, the kleshas, the nyumupa. So the reality of kleshas, mental defaultments, and the reality of karmic force, these two need to be studied and need to be get rid of. Unless and until these two causes are eradicated, there's no way to get freedom from the disease. Now we shall have to roughly look at how we act ordinarily, or even in practice of Dharma, or in day-to-day life. Our being has three basic doors of acting: the bodily, the physical form, the vocal, and the mental, the mind. These three components are cause of all our action. The action of physical body, the action of vocal component, both are not act by its own or by automatically. The physical action, the vocal action, both need to be an initiator, a cause. A force which is letting the expressed action of physical or vocal expressions. That is the mindset. And the mindset can have three different forms or components: a form of hate, a form of attachment, and attachment and hate, these two nature is the initiator of all our vocal and physical expressions and actions, and which might cause in different effects. There are so many different kind of karma can be accumulated by these expressions or actions. The attachment and the hate, these two mindset is the direct result of ignorance. Now again, you pay attention to the word ignorance, because this ignorance is the root cause of all our suffering, because it is the root cause of all defaultments of mind, mental obstacles. And how it remains ignorance? What does not know by this? So from where the four different schools of philosophical tradition departs differently in understanding of the ignorance, the avidya, the basic root cause of all mental developments, and thereby causes into right, wrong, or neutral actions of physical, vocal, and mental creates or originates or initiates. So this is a basic question in Buddhist philosophy to clearly identify the nature of the ignorance. Ignorance is not termed in Sanskrit just not knowing. It is termed as avidya, marikpa. The negation word is put in front of the name. So it is not simply not understanding. It dilutes the understanding. It dilutes the mind's focus on the reality. It does not allow to see the thing as it is, yatharth. The thing as it is prevented to seen, and it colors the thing in an entirely different way. So to understand the nature of the ignorance is most important for students, for practitioners, and for everyone. Particularly for practitioners, whatever may be practice, in any stage of practice, you have to watch how the ignorance mindset, the nature of avidya, which is the starting of the 12 link of Paticammuppad, is operate in us, and how it grasps the falsehood, and how it inclings on the falsehood, and how it creates the duality. So that is very important. The time is up, and we shall stop here. And today we discussed about the truth of suffering, and we started little bit discussion on the truth of origin of suffering. And tomorrow we shall continue after this. So thank you very much.